"Flipper, Flipper," called Kathy. Just then a little shiny black head popped out of the water. Flipper was a baby seal whose mother had been killed just after he was born in the chilly blue waters of southeastern Alaska. An old Indian from a nearby village found him lying on a rock, crying hungrily. The Indian planned to fatten up the little creature and eat him, as seal liver was considered a special treat among the fishermen. Just a few days later, the Swinson family came into the harbor and anchored their fishing boat. They decided to row ashore and visit their old friends. They had a nice time talking with old Pete, the Indian, and the rest of the village. Just as they were getting ready to leave, they heard an unusual sound, something like a baby crying with a frog in its throat. The Swinsons' 13-year-old daughter, Kathy, curiously asked the old Indian, Pete, if there was a new baby in the village. He laughed as he took Kathy to see the seal. As soon as she saw the friendly little creature, it captured her heart, and she wanted it for a pet more than anything. Old Pete, seeing how taken Kathy was with the little seal, offered it to her. Kathy's father wasn't sure that a seal would be the best pet for a fishing boat, since, as the seal grew, he would be wanting to eat lots of high-priced fish. Meantime, Kathy's mother decided she would like to have the experience of rearing this unusual animal herself. They finally all agreed to the idea and rowed back to their boat with the baby seal cradled in Kathy's arms. The next 2 weeks of Kathy's life were extra busy, as night and day she would have to get up from whatever she was doing and rush to the little seal's bed, which was an empty fish bin, and stuff small pieces of herring down his ever-open and waiting mouth. The little seal was so charming that the Swinsons grew to love him very much. They decided to name the seal Flipper, since he liked to flap at everybody and everything within reach. Every time Curly, the black Scottish terrier, passed by, Flipper would reach out and help Curly on his way with a big squat. At night, when the fishing boats anchored, neighboring fishermen would come over to the Swinsons' boat just to watch Flipper, who was very used to performing for people by now in his little tub of salt water. When he was tired of showing off, he wanted to be left alone. He had a trick of splashing water all over everybody. One night, Kathy's friends came over to make taffy candy. When it was cool, they set it out on the deck, forgetting all about the curious Flipper, who had been feeling neglected since he wasn't allowed in the kitchen. Kathy and her friends had returned to the kitchen just after leaving the taffy to cool. In just a couple of minutes, they heard Flipper cry, and they rushed out to see him all tangled up in the threads of taffy candy. He had stuck his flipper in and turned the whole pan over. First he would lift one flipper as far as it would go, watching the taffy stretch and stretch. Then he would do the same thing with the other flipper. He tried to shake off the stringy ropes, but they only wound more around his whiskers instead. The girls left him to his fun while they got a tub of salt water and some special kelp or seaweed soap that they had bought just to use on Flipper. Flipper was having so much fun that he wasn't too happy with the idea of taking a bath. The girls went ahead with the job, and when one of them dropped the soap back into the tub of water after using it, Flipper ate it all except a few bits. Woo! Occasionally, the Swinsons let Flipper go overboard for a swim in the ocean, since he never tried to swim away. Why should he? The Swinsons were his family. In the ocean he could do somersaults and the deep dives which he loved so much. Kathy had to have special permission from her parents before letting him go overboard, and only when the boat engine was stopped, because otherwise Flipper might swim too close to the propeller and get badly hurt. One day their boat engine was broken, and Mr. Swinson had to work on it. He worked all morning, and by afternoon he said he guessed it would never start, and that they would have to send to town for parts. But since he wasn't quite willing to give up, he continued to work on it some more. It was a hot afternoon, and Flipper longingly looked at the cool water and then at Kathy, begging for a swim. Kathy tried to avoid looking at him, since her father had said he might get the engine started any minute. As the afternoon wore on and on, Kathy became impatient and decided her father wasn't being nice, since Flipper could have had a good swim already. Flipper cried, and finally Kathy gave in and let him go overboard for just a few minutes. She thought the engine would not start and that her father would not know what she had done. Flipper had barely splashed into the water when the engine started. As he dived under the boat, he was killed by the blow of the propeller hitting his head. The shock of the impact was heard and felt throughout the whole boat. Kathy's father rushed out of the engine room just in time to see the bleeding and lifeless Flipper float to the top of the water. One look at Kathy's face told the story of disobedience. Without saying a word, her father took the grief-stricken Kathy into her cabin to lie down. Poor Kathy did a lot of thinking that lonely evening as the sad family sat and watched the sunset. She made a decision that she has tried to keep since then, to obey her parents always, even if it didn't seem to make sense. For she knew that if she hadn't been disobedient, little Flipper would have been there with her, watching the sunset and snuggling his head in her lap. It's a sad story.